All right, and it seems like the flow of people in has slowed to a trickle. So I'm going to admit these last two people that just came in, and I am going to go ahead and get started. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to day 4 of the training. We will be wrapping up our primary series of training webinars today. Just a little bit of housekeeping. We do have a hard stop time of 3 o'clock today. I think I have just about maybe just shy of 2 hours of material here. So we are going to work to get through that. We may not have time to actually answer any questions today, depending upon how the material pans out. So if we don't get to answer those questions today, then just be sure that you are putting them in the chat or sending them to us at liheap@ihcda.in.gov. And whatever we don't get to answer today, we will address on Tuesday. All right, let me share my other screen here. All right, so today we are going to be going over budget and award management, claims, and transmittals. So first, we're going to go through the budget overview. As you mostly should know, LSPs do have 7 line items to which they budget their program year awards. So there's administrative expenses, outreach and eligibility determination, Assurance 16, regular benefits, crisis benefits, emergency repair and replacement, and emergency services. And we're going to go through those one by one. So the first one is going to be the administrative expenses. Now, the administrative expenses line item can be used to cover overall administration and operation of the program. These types of expenses can include, but are not necessarily limited to, EAP administrative functions, including program planning, staff training, reporting, allocated costs such as rent, utilities, maintenance, and general supplies. EAP service delivery functions, which can include fiscal, executive, supervisory, management, and support operations. And that may also include any agency salary allocations. And any expense that is otherwise eligible to be paid using the outreach and eligibility determination. As with last year, agencies may budget up to 7.5% of total expenditures to administrative expenses. Note that the administrative expenses may not be supplemented with any other federal funds. Also note that the 7.5% maximum there is based on your final expenditures and not on the initial award. So if you're underspending on your overall budget, but you max out your 7.5% administrative expenses line, there is a possibility that you might actually go over your 7.5% of the final expenditures. And in that case, you would need to pay back a portion of those funds to IHCDA in order to ensure that we are under our overall admin limit with the feds. And because of this, it is important that EAP supervisory staff and agency fiscal staff are keeping in regular communication and just checking in with each other to ensure that obligations are more or less in line with those administrative claims. We also have the outreach and eligibility determination. So this was a line item that was initially introduced in 2021 under the name direct program expenses. And last year, in order to kind of make it a bit easier for everyone to incorporate into their procedures, we did change the name to outreach and eligibility determination. So these expenses are defined as costs that are specific to the delivery of EAP and do not otherwise contribute to overall operations of the agency, nor to any individual program within the agency. Something to know about outreach and eligibility determination is that indirect or allocated costs may not be charged to that line item in any circumstances, nor may payroll for management, executive, or supervisory staff, even if it's a manager or supervisor who oversees EAP. All such expenses must be charged to the administrative expenses or paid from unrestricted funds. So what can be considered allowable outreach and eligibility determination charges? You can pay your salaries or payroll for any line level intake staff as long as they have no supervisory or management responsibilities. You can pay for supplies needed by intake staff in order to determine eligibility, as long as those supplies will not be used for any other purpose within the agency. You can pay for any client outreach initiatives as long as those initiatives are focused solely and exclusively on Energy Assistance Program. And you can pay for technology needs that will only be utilized by EAP staff in eligibility determination, intake, or outreach. On the other side of the coin, what may not be considered allowable outreach and eligibility determination charges? That would include salaries or payroll for management, executive, supervisory, fiscal, or any other support staff, whether direct salary or a spread, regardless of the duties being performed by those individuals. If they meet that management, executive, supervisory, fiscal, or other support staff designation, then they are ineligible to be paid out of this line item. Supplies that will be used by the agency at large or by any other departments within the agency outside of EAP. Any client outreach initiatives that promote the agency as a whole, as opposed to only promoting EAP. And technology needs that will be used by other agency departments outside of EAP. These are the things that can't be paid for using outreach and eligibility determination. It also excludes any rent or utilities, even if these rent or utilities are for an office location that only provides EAP services, and any indirect or allocated costs whatsoever. And I know I've kind of mentioned it a couple times, but I just really want to hammer home the point that payroll for management, executive, supervisory, or agency, clerical, and support staff may not be charged outreach and eligibility determination, regardless of duties being carried out or regardless of what departments are overseen by that person. All such expenses must be charged to administrative expenses, or they may be paid from unrestricted funds. And this is a federal rule related to the definition of administrative expenses and program costs. Now, the outreach and eligibility determination is limited to a cap of 4.5% of an LSP's EAP award. This is the same amount that we used last year. The 4.5% with outreach and eligibility determination, though, is based on your total award amount and not on your expenditures. So if you underspend in the rest of your award, but you max out that 4.5% line, that's not going to trigger any kind of payback for you. If you do exhaust your outreach and eligibility determination line, those eligible items can also be paid out of the administrative expenses line. However, that doesn't work both ways. Administrative expenses may not be paid for out of the outreach and eligibility determination if they don't meet the definition of outreach and eligibility determination allowable items. Next, let's move into Assurance 16. So Assurance 16 refers to the optional 16th assurance of the federal LIHEAP statute, and this assurance allows grantees to set aside a maximum of 5% of its award in order to engage in services and activities that are designed to reduce clients' household energy needs and thereby to reduce the future need for energy assistance. In Indiana, authorized Assurance 16 activities include energy education programs, direct case management services aimed at increasing self-sufficiency, and referral and advocacy activities that will reasonably be expected to contribute toward reducing household energy need and thereby enabling energy security. Allowable Assurance 16 activities or charges can include needs assessment counseling, energy education workshops, family development casework, time spent assisting client households in negotiating payment agreements with their vendors, or providing kits that supply eligible households with supplies that help reduce energy usage. And these can include, for instance, LED light bulbs, faucet aerators, and things of that sort. I've seen weather stripping kind of included in those kits a lot. Unallowable expenses to charge against Assurance 16 can run the gamut from staff paid time off, any allocated salary spreads, eligibility determination, client outreach, executive salaries, rent and utilities, and services provided to unqualified households. So you may budget a total of up to 5% of your total award to Assurance 16 activities. Once again, that is linked to the amount of your award and not to your total obligations. When claiming Assurance 16, you really have two primary options on how to do it. Option number one is to claim the exact costs incurred, including materials and staff time spent engaged in Assurance 16 allowable activities. This method does require more diligent documentation, and it may come under more scrutiny by claims staff or by monitors. And so if you're using this option, it really is vital that you record exactly what activities staff were engaged in, how much time they spent engaged in those activities, and that documentation is available. And note that only materials and services provided to or on behalf of applicants who qualify for LIHEAP services may be claimed. If you provide services to households that do not qualify for the program, because this is coming from the LIHEAP block grant, which does have that that income eligibility requirement on it, we actually can't pay anything out of the grant that goes to services provided to non-income qualified households. Now, the second option for claiming Assurance 16 is to claim $25 per household that receives Assurance 16 services. This method requires a lot less documentation. You simply need to provide a list of approved households that received the services. If you do use this method, you may not also claim the staff time delivering these services under Assurance 16. You kind of have to pick one or the other there. And services provided to households that do not qualify for LIHEAP, once again, may not be claimed under Assurance 16, no matter which method. Right, the next line item on the list is regular and crisis benefits. So regular benefits are awarded based on matrix points that are worth $25 each, plus a flat rate $150 electric benefit. Crisis benefits are variable based on the exact amount needed for restoration or disconnection prevention, but it is up to a maximum of $500 per utility or $1,000 per household. And remember that all subgrantees are required to allocate at least 8% of your total award amount to crisis benefits through March 15th of the program year. We also offer the opportunity to have emergency benefits here in Indiana. So you may budget up to a combined 10% of your total award to the two emergency benefits lines, which are emergency repair and replacement and emergency services. All subgrantees are required to maintain funding in the emergency repair and replacement line item through March 15th, and that's only to guarantee the availability of these services within your territory for those who might need it. There is no requirement to maintain any funding in the emergency services line. The emergency services line is only used in certain situations, and there usually has to be a declaration of an emergency there. there is some flexibility there to offer it at times of a medical emergency, but that does require some review in order to approve that. The 10% maximum, once again, is based on your total award and not on obligations or expenditures. And after March 15th, all subgrantees are strongly encouraged to defund any remaining funds from these line items and reallocate them to either your regular benefits or your crisis benefits. So here is a review of the different line items, the maximum percentages that you're allowed to allocate to each of them, and what that calculation is based on. As you can see, the only line item that is based on your obligation is the administrative expenses line item. Everything else is going to be based on your total award. All right, so now that we have gone through the line items, let's move on to budget amendments, or rather, award amendments. When IHCDA receives funding from Health and Human Services, it will put the funding through the allocation table, and we will issue amendments to all active LSP subawards. These amendments may also be issued as a result of an involuntary deobligation of funding, and that could be, for instance, an LSP not meeting its benchmarks and triggering a redistribution of some of its funding. A voluntary deobligation by an LSP, if an LSP contacts us and notifies us that they are certain that they're not going to spend all their reward and they would like to relinquish some of it, or due to an approved request for additional funding by the LSP, provided that IHCDA has the federal funds available. All subgrantees are expected to issue a request for additional funding once it has obligated 90% of its benefit lines. And additional funding requests must be reviewed by the community programs team and approved by IHCDA's executive director before being granted. IHCDA does reserve the right to partially approve a request. And upon approval, community program staff will issue the amendment. The amendment must be executed by the executive director of the subgrantee and by IHCDA's executive director. And then community programs must also receive and approve a completed corresponding budget from the LSP before we will be able to update the budget within DMS. And as a reminder, additional funding requests must meet these following requirements in order to be considered. They must be submitted on the subgrantee's letterhead. They must be signed by the executive director. And at a minimum, it must include the estimated number of clients to be served with the additional funding, including a summary of existing appointments that are scheduled or mail-in applications that the agency currently has in hand, the average benefit per client at the time of the request, the estimated amount of funds that will be used for program administration, the total amount of funds that are being requested, and the estimated length of time that that request would cover. Budget modifications, on the other hand, may be submitted at any time without a corresponding amendment. The purpose of budget modification is just to move funds from one budget line to another. The budget modifications must be signed by the EAP manager or designee. Authorized designee lists should be submitted to IHCDA. And prior to executing budget modifications, community programs staff will review the request, and we will ensure that all line items meet the applicable requirements with regard to minimum or maximum amounts of allocation. So you should be aware that if a budget modification is not signed, or if it does not meet any of the policy requirements for any given line item, or if maybe it might not be adding up to the correct total amount, then the budget modification will not be approved and community program staff will request a new budget modification. So we have some best practice suggestions with regards to your budget lines and to awards and amendments. So first, just make sure you're monitoring your obligations regularly. Consider monitoring them daily once you get close to your 75% obligation on any of those benefit lines. And try to be proactive in thinking about requesting additional funds. Remember that does take some time to run the request through leadership and to draft and generate those amendments. I will say from our end, the process or procedure internally of submitting those requests has changed a bit. Our executive director, Jake, does have a particular format he likes for us to submit those on. So once we receive those requests from you, we then need to put that information into Jake's preferred format and send it to him. And so what we've been doing is we've been running them on kind of a weekly schedule. And if we get any requests from the network ahead of that day that we send those requests in to Jake, they will go in that week. Otherwise, they'll wait until the following week. I'm going to firm up what that schedule is going to look like for this coming year, and I will be sure that everyone has that information in the final version of the manual, just to set a good expectation of, if you submit a request on X day, it will most likely be escalated to Jake on Y day. Next best practice suggestion is to consider how you might maximize your ability to completely obligate your funding. So what I mean by that is considering what the benefit amounts will be in a particular line item and kind of honing your line item to match that. So for instance, regular benefits should always be budgeted in multiples of 25, because your regular benefits is just going to pay for your heating benefits, which always is a multiple of 25, since each point is worth $25. And then also the electric adder, which is $150, which of course is a multiple of 25. So if you have $750,002.49 allocated to your regular benefits line, then you are going to find yourself in a scenario where you can completely obligate $750,000, but you're always going to leave that $2.49 on the table. So the suggestion is, after allocating your other lines, if you find that you have an odd number in your regular benefits, we strongly recommend rounding that down to a multiple of $25 and just putting that excess into your crisis benefits line. Next best practice suggestion, always round down. To be sure that you are staying within the required caps and to avoid any ambiguity with regards to interpretation of that policy, it is recommended that you round down rather than up on line items such as administrative expenses, Assurance 16, and Outreach and Eligibility Determination in cases where that percentage does not work out to a clean, non-fractional dollar or cent amount. Be aware of timelines with those emergency benefits. Unless IHCDA issues additional guidance or grants a specific exception, emergency services and emergency repair and replace may only be administered through March 15th. So that what that means is that if you're keeping funds within those lines after March 15th, they're essentially going to be unusable, and they will prevent you from reaching peak efficiency in your administration of your program funds. And in the long run, that can impact your administrative expenses cap. So therefore, we strongly recommend that all agencies submit a budget modification in order to move any excess funds out of the emergency repair and replace and emergency services line items and into regular benefits or crisis benefits after March 15th. Next best practice suggestion is to look at your LSP's track record on obligations. Take a real hard look at the LSP's history for the past few years with regard to how closely you've been able to spend your entire obligation. And if you find that you have consistently not expended your entire award, you might want to consider taking that into account when determining your administrative expenses allocation. Remember that line item is based on total expenditures rather than the award. If you underspend your award but max out your administrative expenses line, you may need to pay back a portion. So therefore, it might make sense to obligate a little bit less than your maximum allowable 7.5% to that. And if you find that you're actually reaching more households and your obligations are higher than you expected, you can always move some of those funds into your administrative expenses line item and bolster that a bit. But it's probably best to underestimate and then move it up than to overestimate it and then potentially find yourself in a situation where you've overspent. Next best practice suggestion, submit claims regularly. Submitting grantee payment claims such as admin, outreach and eligibility determination, and A16, as well as those reimbursement claims for ERR and for biofuel payments made by the agency, is a good way to keep the agency's cash flow going. And monthly submission of admin claims is actually a requirement in the subgrantee agreement. And since you are going to be doing those admin claims anyway, it really is a best practice to submit these other claims, the outreach and eligibility, the A16, ERR, at the time of submitting administrative claims. Communicate regularly with your fiscal team. So for EAP program staff, you want to be sure that your fiscal team does have access to EAP policies and procedures manuals and that they understand all the requirements. I know that we did ask you all to invite your fiscal teams to today's training, so I hope that a lot of them are here to be able to get some of this information firsthand. Compare your obligation percentages for your administrative expenses to your overall obligations, just to make sure that they're more or less in line with each other. Make sure that the fiscal team and EAP management team are aware of trends with regard to applications and obligations. And we do suggest that we will be posting this training to the website. Make sure that your fiscal team, especially if there are any members who weren't able to make it today, please let them know that this is here and make sure that you share the link with them so that they're able to review it and that they're able to go back and watch it again at their leisure if they need to refer to it further. And let us know if future trainings with a finer focus on fiscal issues would be helpful. So we do want to hear from you. We'd love to be able to share other best practices that we have not thought of in the future. So if you do have any suggestions of best practices that you think that we should be sharing, please do send those along to lihep@ihcda.in.gov. All right, so let's move now from the world of budgets and awards into transmittals. So transmittals are the official written and electronic notification to a vendor that we are committing to send a specific amount of funding to a vendor on behalf of their customers. Language in the EAP MOA authorizes the vendor to accept the transmittal as being a binding agreement to pay, in spite of the fact that their MOA exists between them and IHCDA rather than with the subgrantee. That's why it's so important that any claims adjustments after a transmittal has been accepted are being handled with the addition of positive or negative claims rather than just adjusting the existing claim. So a typical transmittal consists of several components. There's the transmittal report, which is the long, it's usually I think up to 20 pages long report containing all of the detailed information of the households and accounts that are receiving claims. So it has information about the applicant, the head of household, the service address, the account number, any at-risk factors in the household, the amount of the benefit, the date of the benefit, et cetera, et cetera. The second component is a transmittal signature sheet. This is just a single sheet that corresponds to the entire transmittal report and is matched up using the transmittal number. The electronic data interchange, or EDI, you'll often hear rowing and more so the vendors, but sometimes also rowing, sometimes refer to it as the electronic transmittal. This typically, I believe, is, if I recall correctly, it's actually generated in a text, a TXT format, but it's actually a compact file that some of our larger vendors, notably Duke, Centerpoint, probably the others of the big six, can actually feed that file into their system, and it takes the place of that full Transmittal report and actually feeds the data directly to the computer system to identify which accounts are receiving benefits, how much benefits they're receiving, and all the other information that's on the Transmittal report. The overpayment remittance sheet for Transmills that contain a negative claim. Note that this must be sent to the vendor along with any overpayment transmittals. And the direct payment spreadsheet for transmittals that contain direct payment claims only. So, transmittals can be run in a variety of ways. Some agencies run their transmittals completely through the program staff. We do have some agencies that run their transmittals completely through the fiscal staff. And we do also have agencies that have more of a collaborative process. So although the collaborative process is probably the most secure in terms of having checks and balances on obligation levels and just to prevent human error and fraud, waste, and abuse, there really is nothing inherently wrong with any of the methods. It really is what works best for an agency's structure and processes. Agencies who run Transmill solely out of their program office or solely out of their fiscal office, however, should be sure they have additional communications and corrective procedures in place, and that each part knows and understands the other's role within the process. So at least every other week, but preferably weekly at a minimum, open claims in EAP Connect are pulled into a transmittal. The transmittal is sorted by vendor and by funding source. So each transmittal consists of a list of accounts, information about each account, the benefit amount being pledged for on each account, a total number of pledges on the transmittal, and the aggregate total of pledge funding on that transmittal, as well as identifying information for the vendor and agency, and a transmittal number and batch number. So the transmittal number is going to be a 12-digit number. As of right now, it always begins with 150000. And it is generated sequentially based on the number of transmittals that are created network-wide. The batch number, there, on the other hand, is based on the transmittal generated by any given LSP, and so that batch number is going to vary by subgrantee rather than being consistent across the entire network. In general, the batch numbers are more useful for internal LSP use, while the transmill numbers a lot of times are very useful for communication with IHCDA and with vendors. So once a transmittal has been generated, that transmittal is going to be sent to the vendor by the LSP. Some agencies sign off on the transmittal prior to sending it to the vendor, and we'll talk more about the pros and cons of this later. And then some agencies will send the transmittal off blindly while some others review the transmittals prior to sending them. And we'll talk about the pros and cons of those later as well. So once the LSP sends that transmittal off to the vendor is going to review and sign the transmittal. Once they've done that, that signals their acceptance of the transmittal. Now, one thing to keep in mind here is that the vendor is obligated by terms within their MOA to fully review the claims on that transmittal prior to executing it. The vendor must make any corrections, and that can include correcting incorrectly entered account numbers or incorrect billing names, flagging any inactive or closed accounts for removal from the transmittal, and they must mark them on the transmittal. If any claims are flagged for removal, the vendor should also adjust the aggregate dollar amount of the transmittal just so that everyone can be on the same page for what is expected to be paid out from that transmittal. For vendors that use EDIs, this process is streamlined because their system will use the EDI to verify the accounts, and representatives will typically only have to manually investigate the ones that are rejected by the system. Now, the vendor may send back the full transmittal report, or they may just send back a signature sheet. However, if it is a vendor that only sends back a signature sheet, then they must have a process to communicate any corrections, changes, or rejections to the LSP. Next step in the transmittal process is that the LSP is going to review the return transmittal and make any corrections within EAP Connect. Remember that all corrections and rejections or deletions noted on the transmittal must be made within EAP Connect prior to submitting that transmittal for payment. Failure to make these corrections or deletions may lead to monitoring findings and could represent federal monitoring findings if the particular files are pulled by HHS. It is not enough to know that the vendor is applying the benefit to the correct account, but we must also be able to demonstrate that. Furthermore, failure to remove a rejected claim will result in ICDA overpaying the vendor, which leads to a waste of federal funds. And these corrections must be made as promptly as possible, but within 1 calendar week at the latest of receiving that returned transmittal from the vendor. Next step in the process, once corrections are made, the LSP will submit the transmittal to ICDA Fiscal for payment through the EAP Connect interface. So this must be done within 7 calendar days of receipt of the accepted or corrected transmittal from the vendor. Once you submit that for payment, you will be issued a 7-digit claim receipt number. You can use this claim receipt number in order to check the status of a claim in ICDA Online. The claim receipt number is most useful for communicating with claims or accounting staff about the status of a claim. So once you submit that transmittal to ICDA Fiscal, it does go through our own internal review processes. Those are done in our fiscal and accounting teams and not by community program staff. But those steps are claims review, accounting review, and finally ACH approval. Each step is typically budgeted to take about a week to perform. So in most cases, claims should be paying out about 3 weeks after you submit a transmittal to ICDA Fiscal. And this is why the timeframes early on are so important, because whatever timeframe you're working on, by the time you submit the payment to us, you're tacking on another 3 weeks before the vendor actually gets paid. So now we're going to go over some special considerations with regards to transmittal. So for transmittal generation, review, and management, you might want to look at your procedures and determine, are you grouping your transmittals by funding program? For instance, running transmittals for regular and crisis separately. If you're not doing that, is that something you want to do? And these are, to be clear, these are things that ICDA is not necessarily taking a stance on. But recognizing that different agencies have different structures. You might want to look at your own procedures and talk with your vendors to make sure that your current processes are meeting everyone's needs. So something to look at is whether the transmills are being grouped by funding program and whether it's appropriate to do so or not do so. Are your transmills being generated by program staff or by fiscal staff? And does your current model make sense? Are you operating on a fixed regular schedule for transmittals? Do you have a particular day of the week or a particular time when, every week, this is when you run transmittals? Are your vendors aware of that? Are your vendors able to count on that? Do you have an understanding with them, etc.? Are transmittals being reviewed by program staff prior to being sent to vendors? You know, from experience, I can tell you, looking over a transmittal, it can be pretty easy sometimes to note where maybe there's a missing account number. You might see some irregular amounts where we were talking about earlier, the regular funding should always be a multiple 25, and maybe you see something with an odd dollar amount there. Any account numbers that do not match a format, I'm thinking particularly of vendors such as Duke and Centerpoint that I know off the top of my head have extremely specific and regulated or regular account number formats. And so if you have one number that's not hitting that format, it becomes very obvious when you're looking over that transmittal. And so that might be something you might want to consider working into your procedure, just because doing that extra bit of work up front might save some more protracted back and forth with the vendor on the back end. Do you have a tracking system internally set up for your transmittals? Do you track when you've sent the transmittals and when they come back? And therefore be able to kind of recognize, hey, this transmill was sent to the XYZ vendor 3 weeks ago and we haven't gotten anything back yet. Knowing that, you know, we are going to have to tack on another 3 weeks for the payment process to go through, it would probably be beneficial for every agency to be able to track that and to have some sort of internal process or policy for following up with vendors if you have not received a return transmittal within a certain time frame. The pros and cons of signing your transmittal before you send it off to the vendor. So several agencies do pre-sign their transmittals upon generation, sometimes doing so electronically to save time and burden. I do believe that Rowing last year rolled out an electronic signature to make it even easier and faster to pre-sign those transmittals. One thing that you might want to consider, though, is that agency signature represents acceptance of the transmittal before the vendor has marked any corrections or rejections. So signing upon return from the vendor can be a good way of documenting and tracking timeframes for submitting accepted transmittals to fiscal as well. So really, there's no right or wrong here, but I did want to kind of present the two different sides of that coin because it is up to agencies to have their own processes and have any necessary contingencies in place. Next consideration we have is making and verifying any corrections. So if you find an error with a claim, whose responsibility is it to make those corrections? Is it the manager's responsibility? Is it the intake staff's responsibility? Is it QA staff's responsibility? When making corrections marked by a vendor, are you comparing the corrected information to the information on the file to make sure that what we have in the file supports what we ended up paying out? If corrected information does not match the information in the file, do you have a process or procedure to follow up with the vendor in order to clarify? If a vendor indicates that an account number or a billing name has changed, are you requesting documentation of that information for the file to make sure that all of our backup documentation matches what we paid out? And if claims are rejected, are you comparing the new total listed on the transmittal to the new total within the EAP Connect submission system in order to just be sure that everything is balancing and that the dollar amount that we are going to be paying out is exactly what the vendor is expecting to receive after those rejected claims have been accounted for? So what a lot of this comes down to is we do strongly recommend that there's some sort of codified collaboration between program staff and fiscal staff within the team. In order to be as successful as possible, program staff and fiscal staff should be in lockstep. By knowing what is going on in each other's worlds and the role that each plays in the process, more informed discussions about issues such as realistic administrative expenses limits and proper billing of Assurance 16 can be had more productively. And as a reminder, program staff can always view full budget details, including pending claims, through ICDA online if they have a login. And if there are any concerns about program staff having access to the claim system, I do want to clarify that view-only logins are available. And we do recommend that every agency level manager should be able to at least view their own budget, open claims, and kind of be able to have a good idea of what that big picture looks like. All right, and now we're going to get into some of the more kind of specialized information regarding transmittals. So let's look at reimbursement transmittals. Certain kinds of claims, namely those for crisis biofuel payments made directly to the client by the agency, and for biofuel vendors who enter into an MOA relationship with the agency and the agency pays directly, require special handling as well as additional steps. So these claims are handled the same as a regular third-party claim, and they are processed through the transmittal system since they are still ultimately benefits that are going to the client. However, since the agency has essentially fronted the value of these benefits, the agency is actually going to be the payee, and they will be reimbursed with this payment. So as a check and balance, in order to process these claims correctly and demonstrate to any federal monitors that the benefits did ultimately go to the applicant and not to the agency, we are going to need some additional documentation. So all of these claims, when entering them into EAP Connect, should be assigned to vendor biofuel hyphen subgrantee's name. These claims are going to be processed through the transmittal system as usual. Depending on who processes and accepts transmittals in the agency, the vendor acceptance signature on the transmittal for record keeping purposes should be either the EAP manager, the fiscal director, or the executive director. The same person should not be signing as both agency representative and vendor representative. And you're going to want to take note on the claim receipt number EAP Connect gives you for your reimbursement transmittal claim, as you are going to need it later in order to attach the additional documentation that we need. So after submitting the claim for payment through EAP Connect, you're going to find the claim in ICDA online using the claim receipt number and upload the appropriate documentation. So for reimbursement of crisis paid to applicants, that documentation is going to be an itemized applicant list with benefit amounts. The transmittal report will suffice for this purpose, as well as scans or electronic facsimiles of the checks. And for reimbursement of voucher payments to a biofuel vendor, an itemized applicant list with the benefit amounts. Once again, the transmittal report can suffice, as well as scans or electronic facsimiles of the corresponding executed vouchers and scans or electronic facsimiles of payments made to the biofuel vendor. Our suggestion on this is that it may facilitate the process if program staff and fiscal staff can work out a procedure to create and store the facsimiles of these checks and vouchers in a central location so that both parties are able to access them and attach them to claims as needed. All right, and I'm actually running way ahead of schedule. I guess I've been rushing through this more than I expected to. So we are actually coming up towards the end of the presentation. So we will have some time to take some questions after I finish this up, or I can give you back some time today. But first, let's just get into this last piece. So I want to really kind of break down the timelines and the expectations kind of on all sides, on the subgrantee side, on the vendor side, and on the ICDA fiscal side, in order to show why some of this timely submission matters, and what it can mean for our ability to pay on time when everything is running as it should be. So I tried to put together a table here of claim and transmittal timelines using four kind of different scenarios here. So the first column is going to be for regulated utilities that are not in crisis. Second column is regulated utilities that are in crisis. Third column is a biofuel or bulk commodity heating fuel. And fourth column is an indirect energy burden, so someone whose utility anyway is included in the rent. So eligibility determination for regulated utilities not in crisis should be happening within 55 days of application. For regulated utility in crisis, it can be within 55 days of application as long as there is documented mitigation. That can include notifying vendor of moratorium protection between December 1st and March 15th. Of course, as you know, if we're not able to mitigate indirectly, we would need to be able to do that within 48 hours. Biofuel, bulk commodity heating fuel, for the purposes of this table, I did put within 48 hours of application. There is the asterisk there that if you're able to confirm alternate mitigation, or if the client is not actually in crisis, then that would actually be able to be within the 55 days of application, just like the non-crisis regulated utility. And indirect energy burden, including rent, that would be within 55 days of application. So claims awarded. So claims should be awarded to regulated utility, to either regulated utility non-crisis or regulated utility crisis, as long as, again, you have that documented mitigation. The earlier of 14 days from the eligibility determination or 55 days from application. So if you determine eligibility within 30 days of application, those claims should be on that approved file within 44 days from application. We just want it to be, we don't want it to always go to 55. We want it to be, if adding 14 days to when you determine the eligibility is sooner, we want it to be that sooner date. And so most of them are the earlier 14 days from eligibility determination or 55 days of application, with the asterisk exception of that biofuel or bulk commodity heating fuel. If it's in crisis, we really need those to be awarded within 48 hours of application, unless you do have that alternate mitigation or they're not in crisis. Then the claims transmitted. So claims transmitted, as we talked about earlier, should always be within 14 days of those claims being entered into the system. The exception there is that indirect energy burden, because you don't have a vendor that you're sending those off to. And then you come down to claims being submitted to ICDA fiscal. That should always be within 7 days of receipt from vendor, as we talked about earlier, with the exception being the indirect energy burden, those with the utilities including the rent. So that we're going to want them within 60 days of the claims being determined or being awarded. And that is kind of based on the idea that we know that we do require a QA on that. And the policy is that QA should be occurring within 45 days of eligibility determination. So, since with the other utility types, with the other utilities, we expect 14 days before the claims are transmitted. So I simply took that 14, I added it to 45, 45 days for the QA, came up with 59, rounded up to give the 60. As we talked about earlier, the 3 different steps of IHCDA fiscal reviews and processing should add 21 days onto that. So what does that mean for the bottom line of actually getting payments out the door to people? So for all these calculations, I am assuming a 7-day turnaround for the vendor approval, for the vendor to review those transmittals that you've sent, to mark any corrections, any deletions, and get those back to you, which I know can be a large assumption. And we are looking at ways of building better understanding of the vendor's responsibility to return those to you in a timely manner for the future. But for now, until we have that, assuming that 7-day window, so for a regulated utility non-crisis, we are looking, if you take the maximum of everything, of payment within 104 days of when the applicant applied, but ultimately 49 days of the approval date. And I do believe that the MOA says that we're going to be paying it essentially with, like, if you do the math on it, I think it basically comes down to 60 days. So this does give us a little bit of wiggle room. But we're looking to be able to have it where, as long as everything is running as it should, we should be ahead of the promised time. Regulated utility for crisis comes down to the same thing. 104 days of application date, 49 days of approval date. The biofuel book, commodity heating fuel, again, this is assuming it's someone who is under a quarter of a tank or under 10 days of biofuel. We're looking at within 51 days of application or 49 days of approval date. So that's one that I really want to, that I think is one of our most vulnerable populations. There are the people who have those bulk fuels or those biofuels that usually require a fairly large minimum purchase amount in order to guarantee a delivery. And they really are kind of at the mercy, at our mercy when it comes to being able to heat their homes. And so that's why that time frame is really a lot narrower than the others. Is I think that's one place where I think we as a state have a lot of room to improve on and to really serve those households better. And then we come to the include in rent, the direct benefit payment checks. In theory, as long as everyone is hitting their marks, these should be getting issued within 81 days of the approval date. And I acknowledge that there have been some problems with IHCDA. There have been some hiccups with those checks at times. And we can address those as they happen. But I think it's very important that we all are just on the same page and trying to stay consistent with that, because the more we can keep on track with the earlier steps, the more likely it is that everything's going to get processed on time and get there. And, and if not, hopefully we have enough wiggle room built in that we will still make it within that promised time, even if one step runs late. All right, and negative transmittals and overpayments, as a reminder, they should always be happening within 60 days of the eligibility determination. I did put an asterisk there for the biofuel or bulk commodity heating fuel, just because a lot of times your bulk fuel vendors are not going to honor those negative transmittals or overpayments. So that's something where you want to really be careful with, make sure your team, your intake team, is being really careful, and maybe giving an extra once over on any of those bulk fuels, just because really there's a lot of those, especially the mom and pop ones. They're not necessarily going to be able to honor a negative transmittal and to take on to send that money back and then to expect the applicant to pay it. And so you really run the risk with the bulk fuels of not being able to recover any calculation errors there. And of course, with any indirect energy burden with the direct payment checks, we are not going to be able to recover those funds. So there is no negative transmittal or overpayment. And for address changes and EBTRs, those really should be, in all cases, submitted within 90 days of account closure. All right. So yes, I am done well ahead of what I expected to. Like I said, I guess I kind of talked a lot more quickly than I intended to. So I'm going to look at the questions in the chat. Are we going to get a better turnaround time with the self-pay checks this year? We get many calls about previous year self-pay checks. Yeah, that's absolutely our hope, our expectation. We are going, I have not yet had a discussion with the fiscal team, with the program accounting team rather, about those checks. I do know that currently they're being outsourced to Chase, and Chase is completely handling generating the checks and mailing them out. I don't know what that check run schedule looks like, and that's one of the things I really want to get better clarification on this year, as well as just finding out, is that the process that's going to continue this year? My understanding as of now is that yes, it is. I don't know of any changes that are expected. That being said, I do want to make it clear to the program accounting team that we do need some accountability there from Chase on this. And Cindy, please, if you have any examples of ones from previous years who say they still don't have it, please make sure that you're sending those to us so that we can research it. Our program accounting staff, usually when we get those requests, we can usually get an answer from our program accounting staff, usually within a week, of either, yes, that check is still outstanding, so we can stop payment on it and reissue it, or here's our scan of the check showing that it was signed and already cashed. And we actually do get a surprising amount of those where the person seems to just not remember that they got it and cashed it. But absolutely, if someone truly didn't get it, or lost it, got lost in the mail, they accidentally threw it out, whatever the case might be. If we don't have record that they've cashed that check, we absolutely want them to get that benefit. So please do let us know. While we're on the subject, this is something else I can talk about here. I know from experience that a lot of people have difficulty with getting the checks honored, be it at a grocery store, a check cashing facility, Walmart, whatever. So like I said, these are issued by Chase. They're real checks. I promise. I guarantee you they're real checks. So we do have a few options here for people when they say that they are unable to have the checks honored. The first one is to have the person go directly to a Chase Bank location and have it cashed there. Chase generated the check. It's drawn on a Chase account, and any Chase branch will honor that check. The problem with that is, and we know that Chase is the most common bank in the state of Indiana, but we also know there are large parts of Indiana where there is not a Chase anywhere nearby. I know that the Evansville area is one. I think the Muncie area is one. There are some areas of Indiana where the closest Chase Bank might be 60 miles away. It might be in another state. So while going to a Chase Bank is the easiest option, we know it's not feasible for everyone. Second option would be to do a mobile deposit. My understanding is that the problem that some facilities have with the Chase checks is Chase is issuing them like it's a bill payment check. And those are typically not printed on what you think of as check paper. They're printed on a slightly lower quality paper, and I think that to someone who doesn't regularly work with those kind of checks, it looks fake. So a mobile deposit would actually get around that problem because there wouldn't. First of all, they'd be working with a financial institution directly, and also it would be a mobile photo of the check. It wouldn't even be examining the check itself. Third option would be to sign it over directly to the landlord as a third-party check and have the landlord deal with it. We know that that's not necessarily ideal for everyone. And then the fourth option that we have is Chase does have a check verification hotline that anyone at any check cashing facility should be able to call and verify the validity of the check. I do not have that phone number for you off the top of my head right now. I will be sure that I bring it to the question and answer session on Tuesday and share it also in the chat, and just make sure that everyone has access to that. Okay, I think that was everything I wanted to say about the checks right now. Samantha, how can we get in access to that? I'm assuming you are asking about the view-only access to IHCDA online. So typically, someone in your administration or in your fiscal office at your agency usually handles those IHCDA online logins for your agency. But if you're having difficulty with that, let me know, and I will I'll double check with our fiscal teams and see if we can get you access on our end.
Thank you.
Welcome. Stacy, does the MOA require vendors to return the Transmills within 7 days? Centerpoint and Duke take 2 to 3 weeks to get back to us. Yes, Stacy, that's a great question. I'm actually pulling up the MOA right now to refresh myself on what the current language is. I can tell you that that is language that I don't necessarily want to say eager, but I am very open to looking at and strengthening in the coming program year, because we've over the past couple years, we have we've had instances of vendors complaining that they're not getting payment, but then when I look at it, it's like they sat on the transmittal for a month before returning it, and then they want the payment right away. So right now it doesn't have an actual requirement in here. What it does have is it actually defines when the payment is going to be made as within 30 days of when they return the transmittal to you. So it kind of makes it where they're going to suffer an adverse consequence by sitting on it that long. However, it appears that is not having its intended effect. So that's something that when we do our next MOAs next year, that I will, the team and I will strongly consider taking a look at and making a further tweak to in terms of expectations.
Thanks, Thomas. Another thing, could you email a copy of the MOA out to us just so we can read through it and know what it says?
Yeah, absolutely.
Perfect. Thank you.
I feel like it might be on the partner website, but it might not be. So I'll be sure I follow up with an email anyway. Next question, Amanda, is the outsourcing the reason for the ACH not working? Amanda, I wish I knew. I know that ACH not working is not a consistent thing. We definitely have a number of them that do go through by ACH, but I do know that there are it's really inconsistent. And I don't know why. It seems like it's something honestly within EAP Connect, because the way the ACH works is when you run a transmittal on those direct pay claims, it's not actually when you run the transmittal, it's when you submit it to fiscal. In the background, if it's a direct payment claim, in the background, what EAP Connect is doing is it's creating a direct benefit payment spreadsheet, and it's automatically attaching that to the claim. And that spreadsheet has all of the client information, including the address, the mailing address, the benefit amount, and the ACH information if it's there. Now, if the ACH information is there, when the claims team processes it and it goes through to our financial software, it's supposed to basically process it where if there's ACH information, it's going to process the line as an ACH. If there's no ACH information, it goes on to the mailing address. I don't know why some of these, only certain accounts, only certain households seem to be coming through on those spreadsheets without ACH information. But basically that would happen before that outsourcing step. So I do believe it is something in EAP Connect. I have no insight into what it is. But thank you for putting that back on my radar. And that's something that that we will follow up with Rowing about to investigate. Micah, will direct deposit ever be offered for direct pay? Yeah. So there is a form. I think it's the direct benefit payment election form, I believe it's called, where an applicant can elect to either get a paper check, get a direct deposit, or have the value of their benefit waived to the other utility that they pay directly. And that form does have ACH information on it. And Micah, we will, oh, and I see that you answered that. So it looks like you're falling into that category that I was just talking about with Amanda, where I don't know what the error is. But I will, like I said, we will follow up with Rowing and ask them to investigate that. When we get return checks, how does IHCDA forward to the new address without an EBTR? So Rosa, as long as you confirm that address with us, we don't need to go through a formal EBTR process for return checks. That's usually when Sam will reach out and say, we received this check from this person. Can you verify the address? And if it turns out that it is the wrong address or if they've moved, just letting us know and being sure that you do update that information in EAP Connect so that we always have the correct information in EAP Connect. Plus, it makes sure that in cases where we issue extra benefits, that we're going to be sending it to the right place the next time around. That's sufficient for us. We follow up with our claims team directly and ask them, hey, make this manual change to this check.
Quick question to that then.
Yes.
When we do get those new addresses and we do the change in EAP Connect, is it in the physical address or is it in the mailing address?
Physical, please.
I tried it and it wouldn't let me do it in the physical. It let me do it in the mailing, so I did it in the mailing.
Okay.
Because he was out of state.
Gotcha. Okay. That makes sense. Yeah. So mailing works in a pinch, and that might be a case where, because of our policies, we might have to stick with mailing in that scenario.
Okay.
But when we can, we want to change the physical address to be sure. But yeah, with that one, if it's someone where he moved out of state after getting the notification that he was approved, we still need to honor that approval. But yeah, we can't actually have something showing, like, because then it opens the door to pay utilities out of state. So we don't want a service address to be out of state. So that makes sense. Yeah.
Okay.
In that case, mailing.
Yeah, same with me, Thomas. They did it to me too.
Yep. Yeah, no, in that scenario, that totally makes sense. Linda, charges for ERR. Do we need to keep all charges for that applicant on one claim, or can we claim as we go? Linda, I think that it would be easier from a monitoring standpoint if it is all on one claim. But currently there's nothing in the policies that say that you can't claim as you go. So I think best practice would be to have it on one claim, but right now there's nothing saying that you can't do it as you go. Brad, PACE had fewer issues this program year, phone calls on self-pay. Highly recommend discussing with the client about direct deposit. Cool. As long as people can actually get the direct deposit, and I really hope we can get to the bottom of that issue. All right, Lisa, more ACH issues. Do I see as a problem of Chase printing the checks as a bill pay check, and many of the clients work within financial institution? It's certainly a concern of mine. Like I said, I have not had that discussion yet with our program accounting department, but that is something that is on my radar to do. And I am definitely interested in seeing if there are any other options that can be explored there. And Lisa, with your permission, I would like to include your concern, just to kind of back us up.
Absolutely. I mean,
Yeah,
that I just think we're looking, I mean, if you look at that population that we serve, we're not addressing, I just think we've got to take that into consideration. They don't, most of them don't have mobile banking. I mean, we see a lot of clients using these green dot cards or different things. And I'm just, we've got to take our customer base into account when we're making these decisions.
Yeah, and being underbanked is a chronic problem with this population. I do agree. So yeah, so I'm happy to see the concern around this situation, and I do want to let everyone know that I am right there with you 100%. Right now, I think for the the remainder of this program year, our hands are tied a bit, but I do want to explore what might be able to be adjusted for the next program year. All right, more from Brad. Are we aware that Duke will reverse the pledge after 60 days if payment is not received? I have networked with Duke Energy that the customer service I speak with will remove the pledge and re-entering the pledge to give another 60 days. Brad, please, when you get that communication from Duke, please just forward it to us. That is a violation of the terms of their MOA that they signed. And especially when a lot of times that payment not being received is a result of them either not allocating the payment after they actually have received it, or sitting on the transmittal until day 58. So, but the other part of that is that they did agree that they are going to accept the payment in arrears, and that they are going to credit the account at the time of the transmittal. And without a negative transmittal, they are still expected to honor that. Rosa, on the vendors with EDI files and vendor portal users, there is no way to verify the new total when the vendor sends back the transmittal. Good to know, Rosa. We'll talk with Brad at Rowing about that. Could ACH problem have anything to do with entering the client's name as the account holder rather than the bank's name? I've noticed my intake doing this often. Maybe it's worth a shot. Like I said, I'm gonna be checking in with Rowing to see if they can map the process and figure out why. There are definitely somewhere I've seen, and maybe I was looking at it wrong, but I feel like there was one that I specifically was looking at where everything looked to be entered correctly in EAP Connect, but it was not present on the spreadsheet that attached to the claim. So my gut feeling is it's a process mapping issue somewhere. But yeah, I'll ask them how, if that's entering incorrectly, how does the system navigate that? Will Chase cash the checks that issues through the bill pay program if the applicant does not have an account with them? My program accounting team has told me yes. They have assured me that that Chase has committed to honoring those checks even for non-account holders since it is drawn on a Chase account. FSSA puts SNAP benefits on EBT cards. Why can't we do the same with their EAP benefits? Pam, that was actually an idea that I sat in on some meetings about that just before the pandemic started, I guess. And we were down to the point where we were looking at card designs, and something happened with that arrangement. I believe it was on IHCDA's end. I believe for whatever reason, someone at IHCDA decided not to move forward with it. I know that there was concern of applicants losing the cards and the cost of replacing them, I believe. I can't remember all of the specifics. Like I said, this would have been back in late 2019 that we started to move forward, and then it just stopped. I think that that's something that we can probably reopen that door, especially since I have the evidence of all the problems we've had this year and well, the past 2 years, especially with the checks. Well, and that's kind of what I'm getting at, Pam, that, you know, I think that given the extra evidence of all the back and forth that we've had to do, and, you know, I'm talking back and forth between us internally with our program accounting team, and then us having to follow up with you following up with customers calling you, you having to get back with us, customers calling us. I mean, there's just so much extra burden wrapped up in there, and that's lost productivity. Exactly, Lisa. Lots of staff time, and that loss of productivity is when we're staring at people who are in need and who are facing shutoff. I mean, that's a much larger expense than you can really quantify even. So I think that I think that given everything that we've been through in the past couple of years, I do think that the time might be right for me to open that door again. I can tell you that if that does happen, it's not going to be this program year. I mean, we couldn't get that off the ground that quickly, but it's something that if everyone's in favor of it, I'm happy to open the door again and look at it without making any promises. Stacy, see you have a hand.
It's not really a question for you, Thomas, just a comment for the network. I did reach out to Rowan this morning because the mailing labels do not have or current resident. And Danny let me know that we'll be back on there the first couple weeks of August.
That is helpful. Thank you, because I actually was going to reach out to Rowing about mailing labels. So beginning of August, he said?
Yeah, she said it'll be one of the first things they enhance in August, that it'll be back on there.
Cool. Appreciate that. Thank you.
Welcome.
Yep, I really am on the same page as you, Pam. I was ready to go with the cards, a couple years back. Angela, is that not something that you're currently able to? Oh, you know what, I guess it's kind of like you can do by the population, or then you can do everyone, but you can't do everyone while excluding the at-risk populations. Is that accurate? Yeah, I can certainly ask about that, because yeah, I'm remembering back to my days at SCAP, and I remember having to kind of go through and remove certain populations systematically. So yeah, I think that can be helpful. Brad, why are we not issuing self-pay to the landlords? Essentially, it kind of comes down to the same reason why the Indiana legislature is against doing away, or against the gas tax holiday. So we can go ahead and we can send we could send something to the landlords, just send the payment to the landlords, but the problem is we don't have an agreement with them that would support that they would be agreeing to reduce the recipient's rent by that same amount. We don't really have the teeth to enforce such a requirement, and I think crucially, we don't have the means to monitor them after the fact to ensure that that's happening. Basically, there is nothing at all to stop a landlord from pocketing that money and still charging the applicant their full rent. And HHS does have a requirement that we would need to be able to enforce and monitor if we were to do something like that. Yeah, I was actually just talking about this. I forget who I was talking about this with yesterday. But yeah, it's one of the things I would love to be able to do. I think that would make some things easier and increase housing security for some of our folks. But right now we just have no way of doing that.
My point is, we have one housing authority that will not sign the landlord agreement because of eviction. That landlord knows they're not going to pay when they get approved, so he's ready to evict, so he's not going to sign that landlord agreement. Or if they do sign the landlord agreement, then they're evicted. They're not getting their self-pay checks because they moved. You know, it all just keeps going around and around. So my question was, why are we not paying the landlords? You know, the rental program is. So it's just a question. Thanks.
Yeah, which gets into Elaine's next question. How ICDA monitors IERA payments to landlords. Simple and honest answer there, Elaine, is I don't know. And it's something that I will definitely try to start exploring. But yeah, as of right now, that has to be one of those stock. I can get back to you with that information answers. But I do know that we would have to. The other side of that would be that we would have to draft up an agreement, which could obviously be modeled on any existing agreement that IERA has. Obviously, it's going to be a much more limited scope. And then we would have to, so that would delay the payment because we would have to execute that agreement with each landlord, which is certainly something that we could do. It's not outside the realm of possibility. But I mean, these are some great ideas. Yeah, W-9s. There's love to see this discussion. Some great ideas coming out of this, and definitely some things for us to look at going forward. All right, we have 23 minutes left. Do we have any other questions? Do you guys want a little bit less than half hour of your day back? It's been a long week. I mean, if you want, I could put on a video recording of last year's fraud, waste, and abuse training, and then I can just let you guys watch it while I slip out at 3 o'clock. But see a hand went up. Was it Lisa?
Yeah, could we possibly, all the questions from this whole week, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, would it be possible to get the questions typed with the answers sent out to us? I know that sometimes, well, first off, Monday, when you weren't able to be with us, and then I think it would be good to have them all in writing with the responses, because I know I was trying to jot some of them down and I had some where I only got to mid-sentence where I didn't get the rest of the response down. So is it possible to get some of that over the course? I mean, maybe next week when you do the Q&A session or so forth.
Yeah, I mean, that totally makes sense. Sorry, I'm looking at my calendar for next week. You know, I will tell you, my next couple weeks are absolutely a bear. So I'm gonna have to kind of carve out time here and there where I can to work on typing the answers. I know that some of my team will be helping to compile the questions. As far as getting the answers integrated into there, it might be a couple weeks. But yeah, I think that totally makes sense. And if it's all right with you guys, I mean, I think it would make sense to integrate that with any questions that are discussed on this coming Tuesday and just kind of issue it all at once.
That would be awesome.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I know that watching these videos again is super time consuming, but I am going to get these submitted to the marketing communication team tomorrow, so that hopefully they can be on the website by Monday, I'm hoping. So at the very least, the recordings will be available. Again, I know that that's not a replacement, because it is more time consuming to go sit through a recording or even to skip through it, where, you know, if you have a typed document, you can just search for the term you're looking for. So, but yeah, we will at least get that up as soon as possible. And yeah, I will carve out time where I can to work on getting all those answers typed up for you. All right. Anyone else have any questions? Or do you just want to save them for Tuesday? Great. Well, thank you, everyone.
Hey, Thomas, I've
Yeah.
got a question in the comments.
Oh, did I miss it?
Still,
Sorry.
It wasn't about this, but are we getting a flush still? Can you update us on that?
Yeah, I'm going to try to have a conversation with Greg tomorrow. So I'm narrowing in on figuring out exactly what the amount is. We then need to have a discussion about just kind of some internal, like in the weeds discussion about moving the funds all into one pot to make it easier to handle, so that you guys aren't having to split up transmittals between different funding sources. But yes, we are looking at that being in the next couple of weeks. So I will absolutely give you more firm information when I have it, but it is something that we are actively working on. Elaine, if we can get done the first couple weeks of August, it would be helpful to not have folks think they're approved for the fall. That's the plan, Elaine. Absolutely the plan. So, yes. Done 815 last year. All right. Well, thank you everyone for sticking with it through this week. I know that virtual sessions can be difficult to stay focused on. And when you have them for 4 days in a row, that makes it just 4 times harder to stay focused on. You guys have been champs. And I will see everyone on Tuesday for the Q&A session. Once again, if you have any questions that you think we might need to kind of research, please feel free to send them along in advance. We're also very happy to take them on the fly on Tuesday. Have a great weekend, and thanks again, everyone.
Bye-bye.